This is the template for the payday lenders presentation. Please use this template to prepare your presentation. I'm going to walk you through the changes, additions, and modifications you need to make to this PowerPoint presentation as you prepare your presentation. Again, you're going to be doing a presentation on ACE Cash Express, which is a payday lender. You need to add the names of your group members here. So here I've said your names in red. You're going to remove that and put the names of your group member and change the color of the font to black. Because payday loans are illegal in Georgia, you just want to include this slide. You don't have to do anything to the slide. Do not change it. This will explain why you're going to be looking at ACE Cash Express in Florida and not in Georgia, because payday loans, as we're thinking of them, are not allowed in the state of Georgia. Now, in this slide, here I have a red font question that says, are payday loans allowed in Florida? You're going to do some research and determine if payday loans are allowed in Florida and put some quick information here that indicates if that is the case. On this slide, you don't need to change anything. You just need to confirm that here's the outline of your presentation. You don't need to change anything about that. On the company overview, you don't need to change anything about that. You don't need to change anything on this slide. You just need to familiarize yourself with the information that's here. I suggest that you use this as the transaction that you're going to explain. You should prepare your presentation as if you borrow $300 from an ACE Cash Express. No collateral is going to be required. There will be some proof of income required. So we've already established that. The length of the transaction should be 2 weeks. Payday lenders lend by the week. What I want you to determine is what fees and charges there are, if there are any processing fees, etc., both as a dollar amount and as a percentage. I also want you to determine when your loan would be in default. So in other words, after the 14 days, are there any grace periods associated with the repayment of the loan and or the fees? I would suggest that for the purpose of this presentation, you pretend you borrowed the money on September 1st and that you're going to repay the money on the 15th. And again, you want to determine the total fees and charges for securing this loan. Here's a table that I want you to complete. Again, we put in the loan amount, $300. Typically, a payday lender will have something called an advancement fee. We're going to put the dollar amount of that. They will also tend to have what's called a verification fee, where they're verifying that you actually have income and you are who you are. And they also will charge you interest on the loan for the 2 weeks to 14 days that the loan is outstanding. So I want you to determine what these dollar amounts are and then put the total dollar amount here. And the benefits of the transaction, I want you to determine how many days it takes you to get this loan. And also, one of the other benefits of this is minimal documentation is required. Identify what documents would be required of you to complete this loan, and then describe whether the process was convenient or inconvenient. Now, again, I've identified a branch of ACE Cash Express. What I would suggest is the easiest thing for you to do to get the information you need is to either visit this location or call them on the phone. You probably will do better by visiting in person, but you could call on the phone and try to find out exactly what would be required of you if you wanted to borrow $300 for 2 weeks. And that way you can get the information that you need to complete this table that I was just describing. And also you'd find out what documentations are required. On this slide, you need to identify if there are any federal regulators that regulate payday lenders. You would need to identify in the state of Florida, are there any regulators that regulate payday lenders? And in the city of Jacksonville, you would need to identify if there are any regulators that regulate payday lenders. Here on this slide, you would identify any federal regulator that regulates payday loans, and you would state the primary requirements that the federal regulators have for payday lenders. On this slide, you identify if the state of Florida has any regulators for payday lenders, and again, you would state the major requirements for each of those regulators. Now remember, I have a separate presentation where I talk about the objectives and mechanisms of bank regulations. So when we talk about these requirements here, these requirements are going to relate to the mechanisms of enforcement. So in other words, there may be disclosure requirements. In other words, there may be guardrails that say that payday lenders can or cannot do things within certain boundaries. Those are the kind of things you're going to want to identify here. I have not included a slide for a local regulator because guess what? There's no local regulator of payday lenders in the city of Jacksonville. So I've done some work for you. This slide doesn't require any change. I'm just restating again that payday loans are not allowed in the state of Georgia with one exception. So you don't need to change this, you just need to include this. It may be helpful as you think about and describe the regulation of these various alternative financial services to think about the objectives and mechanics of various bank regulations. There is a separate video in which I discuss the objectives and mechanics of bank regulation. It would be helpful to watch that video as you prepare your bank regulation presentations. Here you need to share any personal insights that you have as a result of working on this presentation. So that is the plan. Let me remind you that this presentation needs to be narrated and automated. In other words, when I post this on the course site, a student should be able to click on that PowerPoint presentation. It will run automatically. In other words, it will advance from slide to slide. And on each slide, it will have some narration that will discuss the information that's on each one of those slides. So again, this presentation needs to be automated and narrated. So that means you're going to have narration for each one of these slides, and you're going to build in automation. In other words, you're going to program into the presentation the amount of time each slide is going to show. And while that slide is showing, you will have some narration embedded in the slide that will voice over the presentation while your classmates are watching and listening. So again, I have a separate video that walks you through how to do this narration and automation. So that is the ACE Cash Express Payday Lender template. Happy studying.